Hello YouTube, welcome to Silmarillion Sunday Part 19. This is also Part 2 of Chapter 21 of Turin Turambar. We're not going to do a recap just because this is in the middle of something and last week's was so short. So if you haven't watched Part 18, please go do so. We will jump right into it on Chapter 21 of the Silmarillion. I am currently on page 206. Also, for those that don't know, I am Don Marshall72, known as the Obscure Lord of the Rings Facts guy over on Twitch. We stream every Sunday at noon, and if you want to come live, answer some questions, join in the reading, if you have any questions during the reading, feel free to ask. Chat on Twitch, feel free to say hi to your future selves, or just YouTube folks watching this in general. Let's begin. In the waning of the years of Mim the dwarf and Ibun his son went out from the Bar en Danwe to gather roots in the wild for their winter store, but they were taken captive by orcs. Then, for a second time, Mim promised to guide his enemies by the secret paths of his home on Amon-Rû, but yet he sought to delay the fulfillment of his promise, and demanded that Gorthal should not be slain. Then the orc captain laughed and said to Mim, "Assuredly, Turin, son of Hurin, shall not be slain." Thus was Bar en Danwe betrayed, for the orcs came upon it by night at unawares, guided by Mim. There many of Turin's company were slain as they slept, but some, fleeing by the inner stairs, came out upon the hilltop, and there they fought until they fell, and their blood flowed out upon the Saragon that mantle the stone. But a net was cast over Turin as he fought, and he was enmeshed in it, and overcome, and led away. And at length, when all was silent again, Mim crept out of the shadow of his house, and as the sun rose over the mist of the Sirion, he stood beside the dead men on the hilltop. But he perceived that not all those that lay there were dead, for by one his gaze was returned, and he looked in the eyes of Beleg the elf. You'll remember Beleg was Turin's friend when Turin was in Doriath, and they were good friends. They separated for a while, Turin and Beleg, but he decided to stay with Turin. But he's still alive, and he's very angry. Then, with a hatred long stored, Min stepped up to Beleg and drew forth the sword Anglakel that lay beneath the body of one that had fallen beside him. But Beleg, stumbling up, seized back the sword and thrust it at the dwarf, and Mim fled in terror, wailing from the hilltop. And Beleg cried after him, "The vengeance of the house of Hador will find you yet!" Now Beleg was sorely wounded, but he was mighty among the elves of Middle-earth, and he was, moreover, a master of healing. Therefore he did not die, and slowly his strength returned, and he sought in vain among the dead for Turin, to bury him, but he found him not. And then he knew that Hurin's son was yet alive, and taken to Angband. With little hope, Beleg departed from Amon-Rû and set out northward, towards the crossing of Teglin. Teglin? I think it's Teglin. Following in the tracks of the orcs, and he crossed over the Brekiak and journeyed through Dimbar, towards the pass of Anak, and now he was not far behind them, and he went without sleeping, whereas they had tarried on the road, hunting in the lands and fearing no pursuit as they came northward, and not even in the dreadful woods of Tower Nufuin did he swerve from the trail, for the skill of Beleg was greater than any that have been in Middle-earth. Better than Aragorn. But as he passed by night through the evil land, he came upon one lying asleep at the foot of the great dead tree, and Beleg, staying his steps beside the sleeper, saw that it was an elf. Then he spoke to him, and gave him lembas, and asked him what fate had brought him to this terrible place, and he named himself Gwyndor, son of Gwilyn. Grieving, Beleg looked upon him, for Gwyndor was now but a bent and fearful shadow of his former shape and mood. When, in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, that lord of Nargothrond rode with rash courage to the very doors of Angband, and there was taken. For few of the Noldor whom Morgoth captured were put to death, because of their skill in forging and in mining of metals and gems. And Gwyndor was not slain, but put in labor in the mines of the north. By secret tunnels, known only to themselves, the mining elves might sometimes escape, and thus it came to pass that Beleg found him, spent and bewildered in the mazes of Taur Nufuin. And Gwyndor told him that as he lay and lurked among the trees, he saw a great canopy of orcs passing northward, and wolves went with them, and among them was a man, whose hands were chained, and they drove him onward with a whip. Very tall he was, said Gwyndor, as tall as are the men of the misty hills of Hithlum. Then Beleg told him of his own errand in Taur Nufuin, and Gwyndor sought to dissuade him from his quest, saying that he would but join Turin in the anguish that awaited him. But Beleg would not abandon Turin, and despairing himself, he aroused hope again in Gwyndor's heart, and together they went on, following the orcs until they came out of the forest on the high slopes that ran down the barren dunes of Anfauglith. Again, these are not places you need to remember. Then, within sight of the peaks of Thangorodrim, the orcs made their encampment in the bare dell as the light of day was failing, and setting wolf sentinels all about, they fell to carousing. A great storm rode up out of the west, and lightning glittered in the shadowy mountains far away, as Beleg and Gwyndor crept into the dell. When all in the camp were sleeping, Beleg took his bow, and in the darkness shot the wolf sentinels, one by one, and silently. Then, in great peril, they entered in, and found Turin fettered hand and foot, and tied to a withered tree, and all about him knives that had been cast at him were embedded in the trunk, and he was senseless in the sleep of great weariness. But Beleg and Gwyndor cut the bonds that held him, and lifting him they carried him out of the dell. Yet they could bear him no further than to a thicket of thorn trees, a little way above. There they laid him down, and now the storm drew very near, and Beleg drew his sword Anglikel, and with it he cut the fetters that bound Tor. But fate was that day more strong, for the blade slipped as he cut the shackles, and Turin's foot was pricked. Then he was aroused into a sudden wakefulness of fear and rage, and seeing one bending over him with a naked blade, he leapt up with a great cry, believing that the orcs were again come to torment him, and grappling him in the darkness, he seized Anglikel and slew Beleg, thinking him a foe. As he stood, finding himself free, and ready to sell his life dearly against his imagined foes, there came a great flash of lightning above him, and in its light he looked down on Beleg's face. Then Turin stood stone still and silent, staring at that dreadful death, knowing what he had done. And so terrible was his face, lit by the lightning that flickered all about them, that Gwyndor cowered down upon the ground, and dared not raise his eyes. But now, in the dell beneath, the orcs were aroused, and all the camp was in a tumult, for they feared the thunder that came out of the west, believing it was sent against them by the enemies beyond the sea. Then the wind arose, and great rains fell, and torrents swept down from the heights of Taur Nufuin. And though Gwyndor cried out to Turin, warning him of their utmost peril, he made no answer, but sat unmoving and unweeping in the tempest beside the body of Beleg Cuthalion. When morning came, the storm passed. When morning came, the storm was passed eastward over Lothlon, and the sun of autumn rose, hot and bright. But believing his flight be washed, but believing that Turin would have fled far away from that place, and all trace of his flight might be washed away, the orcs departed in haste, without longer search. And far off Gwyndor saw them marching away over the streaming sands of Anfauglith. Thus it came to pass that they returned to Morgoth empty-handed, and left behind them the son of Hurin, who sat crazed and unwitting on the slopes of Taur Nufuin, bearing a burden heavier than their bonds. Then Gwyndor roused Turin to aid him in the burial of Beleg. And he rose as one that walked in sleep, and together they laid Beleg in a shallow grave, and placed beside him Belthronding his great bow. That was made of a black yew wood. But the dread sword Anglakel Gwyndor took, saying that it were better that it should take vengeance on the servants of Morgoth than lie useless in the earth. And he took also the lembas of Melian to strengthen them in the wild. Thus ended Beleg Strongbow, truest of friends, greatest in skill of all that harbored in the woods of Beleriand in the elder days, at the hand of him whom he loved most, and that grief was graven on the face of Turin, and never faded. But courage and strength were renewed in the elf of Nargothrond, and departing from Tower Nufuin he led Turin away. Never once, as they wandered together on long or grievous path, did Turin speak, and he walked as one without wish or purpose, while the year waned and winter drew on the northern lands. But Gwyndor was ever beside him to guard him and guide him. Thus they passed westward over Sirion, and came at length to Ethiel Irvin, the spring whence Narog rose beneath the mountains of shadow. There Gwyndor spoke to Turin, saying, "Awake, Turin, son of Hurin Thalion. On Irvin's lake is endless laughter. She is fed from crystal fountains unfailing, and guarded from defilement by Ulmo, Lord of Waters." Ulmo is one of the Valar. Who wrought her beauty in ancient days. Then Turin knelt and drank from the water, and suddenly he cast himself down, and his tears were unloosened at last, and he was healed of his madness. There he made a song for Beleg, and named it Lair Cu Beleg, the song of the great bow, singing it aloud, heedless of peril. And Gwyndor gave the sword Anglakel into his hands, and Turin knew that it was very heavy and strong, and had great power, but its blade was black and dull, and its edges blunt. Then Gwyndor said, "This is a strange blade, and unlike any that I have seen in Middle-earth. It mourns for Beleg even as you do, but be comforted. For I return to Nargothrond of the house of Finarfin, and you shall come with me, and be healed and renewed." "Who are you?" said Turin. "A wandering elf, a thrall escaped whom Beleg met and comforted," said Gwyndor. "Yet once I was Gwyndor, son of Gwylin, a lord of Nargothrond, until I went to the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, and was enslaved in Angband." "Then have you seen Hurin, son of Galdor, the warrior of Dorloman?" said Turin. "I have not seen him," said Gwyndor, "but rumor of him runs through Angband, that he still defies Morgoth, and Morgoth has laid a curse upon him and all his kin." "That I do believe," said Turin. And now they arose, and departing from Ethiel Irvin, they journeyed southward along the banks of Nogrod, until they were taken by scouts of the elves, and brought as prisoners to the hidden stronghold. Thus did Turin come to Nargothrond. I will pause there for a moment. We still have quite a ways to go, so this will probably be a longer stream. We've still got about 12 more pages to go. Yeah, that is the tragedy of Turin Turambar. When I mentioned the whole Greek tragedy thing, that is really where it comes from. The whole, the idea that by mistakes and tricks of the weather and lighting and torment, all of that really comes through. If anyone has questions, feel free to leave them in the chat below. Mona, thank you for the sub. I appreciate it. Oh, you got the anniversary thing all of a sudden. Yeah, I don't know why it happened just now. That was like an hour ago that happened. Regardless, thank you all for sticking with us through this. I know this isn't... as we get further on into the Silmarillion, I feel like there is less of a need to explain things because the language is a little bit less flowery, and there's a lot more of the... there's a lot more of the prose that is in more traditional storytelling, I should say. We do have a question over on TikTok, though. Hello, I don't want a name. Is it true that Mim wasn't really a dwarf? him holding a grudge for his son seems pretty petty. So as far as I know, Mim was a dwarf. I don't think there's any theories that he wasn't. But as far as holding a grudge, dwarves do hold grudges. Elves do too, to a certain extent. All right, let's continue then, shall we? At first his own people did not know Gwyndor, who went out young and strong and returned now seeming as one of the aged among mortal men, because of his torment and his labors. But Findulias, daughter of Orodreth the king, knew him and welcomed him, for she had loved him before the Nirnaeth. And also greatly did Gwyndor love her beauty, that he named her Felivrin, which is the gleam of the sun on the pools of Ivrin. For Gwyndor's sake, Turin was admitted with him into Nargothrond, and he dwelt there in honor. But when Gwyndor would tell his name, Turin checked him by saying, I am Egarwin, son of Umarth, which is the blood-stained, son of the ill-fated, a hunter in the woods, and the elves of Nargothrond questioned him no more. In that time that followed, Turin grew high in favor with Orodreth, and well nigh all hearts were turned to him in Nargothrond, for he was young, and only now reached his full manhood. And he was in truth the son of Morwen Elendwen, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Eledwen, to look upon, dark hair and pale skin with grey eyes, and his face more beautiful than any among mortal men in the elder days. I want to just make a note right now. Tolkien has this habit of constantly saying that this person is the most beautiful, or the strongest, or the smartest, or the most cunning, and then completely negates it a couple chapters later. It's just what he does. I don't know why. But it happens a lot, right? Feanor is the most beautiful, but then Galadriel is the most beautiful, and then Beren is the most, strongest, but then Horin is the It's a whole thing with Tolkien, right? It's not exactly. I'm gonna use a 21st century Gen Z thing. I think that's cap. Poggers. Sorry. Okay, I'm done. Sorry, YouTube folks. This is just Twitch chat coming through into my everyday life. Let's continue. His speech and bearing were that of the ancient kingdom of Doriath, and even among the elves he might be taken for one of the great houses of the Noldor. Therefore many called him Adanahel, the Elf-man. The sword Anglakel was forged anew for him by cunning smiths of Nargothrond, and though ever black, its edges shone with pale fire. And he named it Gorthang, Iron of Death. So great was his prowess and skill in warfare in the confines of the guarded plains that he himself became known as Mormegil, the Black Sword, and the elves said, the Mormegil cannot be slain save by mischance or an evil arrow from afar. Therefore they gave him dwarf mail to guard him, and in a grim mood he found also in the armories a dwarf mask all gilded, and he put it on before battle, and enemies fled before his face. And if I'm right, I seem to remember the actual Children of Horin book having that mask. I think, if I'm right, this is the mask. If anybody wants to look at the screen now, if you're sort of having it off on the side or not looking at the screen, this, I think, is the helmet that he puts on. It's pretty cool. It's got some really nice etchings in it. It's like a blue with a tail at the end. I love the embroidery of the old Tolkien books, and it's illustrated by Alan Lee, the guy that did some of the concept art for the movies. Also, chat, if you want to see it, this is the helmet I'm talking about. I don't know if you can see. There we go. It's pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna keep going. Then the heart of Findulias was turned from Gwyndor, and against her will, her love was given to Turin. But Turin did not perceive what had befallen, and being torn in heart, Findulias became sorrowful, and she grew wan and silent. But Gwyndor sat in dark thought, and on a time he spoke to Findulias, saying, Daughter of the house of Finarfin, let no grief lie between us. For though Morgoth has laid my life in ruin, you still I love. Go whither love leads you, yet beware, it is not fitting that the elder children of Ilúvatar should wed with the younger, nor is it wise, for they are brief and soon to pass, to leave us in widowhood while the world lasts. Neither will fate suffer it, unless it be once or twice only, in some high case of doom that we do not perceive. But this man is not barren. A doom indeed lies upon him, as seeing eyes may well read on him, but a dark doom. Enter not into it, but if you will, your love shall betray you to bitterness and death. For hearken to me, though he be indeed Agwaren, son of Umarth, his right name is Turin, son of Hurin, whom Morgoth holds in Angband, and whose kin he has cursed. Doubt not the power of Morgoth Bauglir. Is it not written in me? Then Findulias sat long in thought, but at last she said only, Turin, son of Hurin, loves me not, nor will. Now when Turin learned from Findulias of what had passed, he was wrathful, and he said to Gwyndor, In love I hold you for rescue and safekeeping, but now you have done ill to me, friend, to betray my right name and call my doom upon me, for which I would lie hid. But Gwyndor answered, The doom lies in yourself, not in your name. When it became known to Orodreth that the Mormegil was in truth the son of Hurin, Thalion, he gave him great honor, and Turin became mighty among the people of Nargothrond. So it actually has the opposite effect. He didn't want all of the attention, but he got it. But he had no liking for their manner of warfare, of ambush and stealth and secret arrows, and he yearned for brave strokes and battle in the open, and his counsel weighed with the king ever the longer the more. And his counsel weighed with the king ever the longer the more. Tolkien, just... awkward sentence. In those days the elves of Nargothrond forsook their secrecy and went openly into battle, and great stores of weapons were made. And by the counsel of Turin the Noldor built a mighty bridge over Narog, from the doors of Felagund for the swifter passage of their arms. Then the servants of Angband were driven out of the land between the Narog and Sirion eastward, and westward to the Nenning and the desolate Falas. And though Gwyndor spoke ever against Turin in the council of the king, holding it an ill policy, he fell into dishonor, and none heeded him. For his strength was small, and he was no longer forward in arms. Thus Nargothrond was revealed to the wrath and hatred of Morgoth. But still at Turin's prayer his true name was not spoken, and though the fame of his deeds came to Doriath to the ears of Thingol, rumor spoke only of the black sword of Nargothrond. In that time of respite and hope, because the elves are kind of winning now, they're doing a really good job, until in that time of respite and hope, when because of the deeds of Mormegil, I have to figure out how to pronounce this, Mormegil, the power of Morgoth was stemmed west of Sirion. Morwen fled at last from Dor-Lomin with Nienor, her daughter, and adventured the long journey to Thingol's halls. Remember, Morwen is Turin's mom, but she gave him up for basically adoption to be fostered by the elves. But she also had a daughter, and Turin is not aware that he has a sister, as far as I know. There a new grief awaited her, for she found Turin gone, and to Doriath there had come no tidings since the dragon helm had vanished from the lands west of the Sirion. Oh, you know what? Actually, I think this is the dragon helm. This might actually be the dragon helm. Sorry, not the thing that Turin wears. My bad. But Morwen remained in Doriath with Nienor, as guests of Thingol and Melian, and were treated with honor. Now it came to pass that when 495 years had passed since the rising of the moon in the spring of the year, there came to Nargothrond 2 elves, named Gelmir and Arminas. They were of Angerod's people, and since the Dagor Bragolak, which is the 4th battle, not the 5th one that just happened near Nath Arnoidiad, this is the 4th one. But since the Dagor Bragolak, they dwelt in the south with Círdan the shipwright, for their far journeys had brought tidings of a great mustering of orcs and evil creatures under the eaves of the Eredwethrin in the pass of Sirion, and they told that Ulmo had come to Círdan, giving warning that great peril drew nigh to Nargothrond. "Hear the words of the Lords of Water," they said to the king. Thus he spoke to Círdan the shipwright. "The evil of the north has defiled the spring of Sirion, and my power withdraws from the fingers of that flowing water. But the worst thing is yet to come forth. Say therefore to the lords of Nargothrond, shut the doors of the fortress and go not abroad. Cast the stones of your pride into the loud rivers, that the creeping evil may not find the gates." Brief aside, so the folks that are in Middle-earth right now don't have a lot of help from the Valar, the lesser gods in Tolkien's universe, or I guess I should call them demigods. No, lesser gods, and then the Maiar are demigods. Regardless, the lesser gods in Tolkien's universe aren't helping. The exception is Ulmo. Ulmo is in all of the waters, both in the Undying Lands and in Middle-earth. And he's basically the only one helping the elves in their fight against Morgoth. So when Ulmo comes forward, it's about to go down. And when we hear from Ulmo, it's usually a problem. Hang on, I'm going to turn my air conditioning down. I'm freezing. I had said before, and I haven't said it in ages because we haven't heard from him, there is a Valar, one of the lesser gods, named Mandos, and when Mandos speaks, bad things happen. I would like to add a second version of that when Ulmo gives you a warning, it's about to go down. You don't ever want a warning from Ulmo. He sees and feels everything. Yeah, Telvin, absolutely right. It gets worse. Absolutely does. All right, I will continue. Here we go. Hear the words of the... All right, here we go. Orodreth was troubled by the dark words of the messengers, but Turin would by no means hearken to these counsels. And least of all would he suffer the great bridge to be cast down, for he was become proud and stern, and would order all things as he wished. Oh, did I skip a page? Oh, no, I didn't. I thought I skipped a page. Sorry. Orodreth was troubled. Yeah, okay. Soon afterwards, Hondir, Handir, Hondir, lord of Brethiel, was slain, for the orcs invaded his lands, and Hondir gave them battle, but the men of Brethiel were worsted, and driven back into the woods. And in the autumn of the year, biding his hour, Morgoth loosed upon the people of Nogrod a great host that he had prepared, and Glaurung, the Urloki, Urlokai. Dragon. You can just say dragon, Tolkien. Okay, hang on. It's Urulloki with an accent over the O. So I think it's Urlokai. I could be wrong about that, though. I'm not sure. Regardless. Glaurung passed over Anfauglith and came thence into the north vales of Sirion, and there did great evil. Under the shadow of Eredwethrin he defiled the Ethil Ervin, and thence he passed into the realm of Nargothrond, and burned the Taleth... Oh, whoa. Chill. River. Sorry, y'all. Sorry about that. All right. Totally lost my place now. Defile, and thence he passed into the realm of Nargothrond and burned the Taleth Dirnen, the guarded plain between Narog and Teglin. Now, oh, hang on, there's someone at my door. Hang on. Sorry about that, everybody, and sorry about that, YouTube. I know you can kind of skip ahead a little bit, but we're back. Ooh, hang on. My Twitch is about to lose battery. Or, sorry, my TikTok stream is about to lose battery. Actually, you know what? I'm going to end this and restart because I have to reset it now. Sorry, y'all. Sorry about that. We're all good, though. My neighbor just wanted to let me know that there was a package delivered to her and not me, so I will go get it after this reading. Let's continue then, shall we? Completely lost my place again. Then the warriors of Nargothrond went forth, and tall and terrible on that day looked Turin. And the heart of the host was upheld, and he rode on the right hand of Orodreth. But far greater was the host of Morgoth than any scout had told, and none but Turin, defended by his dwarf math, could withstand the approach of Glaurung. And the elves were driven back and pressed by the orcs into the field of Tumhalad, between Ginglith and Narog. Again, you don't have to remember any of these places. It's just places. They don't have any real importance, and I'll tell you if they do. But hang on, totally lost my place again. But Turin, and on that day all of the pride and host of Nargothrond withered away, and Orodreth was slain in the forefront of battle, and Gwyndor, son of Gwylin, was wounded to the death. But Turin came to his aid, and all fled before him, and he bore Gwyndor out of the rout, and escaping to the woods, he laid him on the grass. Then Gwyndor said to Turin, "Let bearing pay for bearing, but ill-fated was mine, and vain is thine, for my body is marred beyond healing, and I must leave Middle-earth. And though I love thee, son of Hurin, yet I rue the day that I took thee from the orcs. But for thy prowess and thy pride, still I should have love and life, and Nargothrond should yet stand for a while. But if thou love me, leave me. Haste thee to Nargothrond and save Findulias. And this last I say to thee, she alone stands between thee and thy doom. If thou fail her, it shall not fail to find thee. Farewell." Then Turin sped back to Nargothrond, mustering such of the rout as he met on the way, and the leaves fell from the trees with the great winds as they went, for the autumn was passing on the dire winter. But the host of the orcs and Glaurung the dragon were there before him, and they came suddenly, ere those that were left on guard were aware of what had befallen in the fields of Tumladad. In that day, the bridge over Narog proved an evil, for it was great and mightily made, and could not swiftly be destroyed. And the enemy came readily over the deep river, and Glaurung came in full fire against the doors of Felagund, and overthrew it, and passed within. And even as Turin came up, the dreadful sack of Nargothrond was well nigh achieved. The orcs had slain or driven off all that had remained in arms, and were even then ransacking the great halls and chambers, plundering and destroying. But those of the women and the maidens that were not burned or slain, they had heralded onto the terrace before the doors, as slaves to be taken into Morgoth's thraldom. Upon this ruin and woe Turin came, and none could withstand him, and would not, though he struck down all before him, and passed over the bridge, and hewed his way towards the captives. And now he stood alone, for the few that followed him had fled. But in that moment Glaurung issued from the gaping doors and lay between Turin and the bridge. Then suddenly he spoke, and by the evil spirit that was in him said, "Hail, son of Hurin. Well met." Then Turin sprang about and strode against him, and the edges of Gorthang shone with the flame. But Glaurung withheld his blast, and opened wide his serpent eyes and gazed upon Turin. Without fear, Turin looked into them as he raised up the sword, and straightway he fell under a binding spell of the lidless eyes of the dragon, and was halted, moveless. Then, for a long time he stood as one graven of stone, and they too were alone, silent before the doors of Nargothrond. But Glaurung spoke again, taunting Turin, and he said, "Evil have been all thy ways, son of Hurin. Thankless, fosterling, outlaw, slayer of thy friend, thief of love, usurper of Nargothrond, captain foolhardy and deserter of thy kin. As thralls thy mother and thy sister live in Dorlomen, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags, and for thee they yearn, but thou carest not for them. Glad may thy father be to learn that he hath such a son, as learn he shall. And Turin, being under the spell of Glaurung, hearkened to his words, and he saw himself as in a mirror misshapen by malice, and loathed that which he saw. And while he was yet held by the eyes of the dragon in torment of the mind, and could not stir, the oaks drove away the herded captives as they passed nigh to Turin, and crossed over the bridge. Among them was Findulias, and she cried out to Turin as she went, but not until her cries and the wailing of the captives was lost among the northward road did Glaurung release Turin, and he might not stop his ears against the voice that haunted him after. Then suddenly Glaurung withdrew his glance and waited, and Turin stirred slowly, as one waking from a hideous dream. Then, coming to himself, he sprang upon the dragon with a cry, but Glaurung laughed, saying, "If thou wilt be slain, I will slay thee gladly. But small help will thou be to Morwen and Nienor. No heed didst thou give to the cries of the elf-woman. Wilt thou deny also the bond of thy blood?" But Turin, drawing back his sword, stabbed at the dragon's eyes, and Glaurung, coiling back swiftly, towered above him and said, "Nay, at least thou art valiant, beyond all whom I have met. And they lie who says that we are of our part do not honor the valor of foes. See now, I offer thee freedom. Go to thy kin, if thou canst. Get thee gone. And if elf or man be left to make tale of these days, then surely in scorn they will name thee, if thou spurnest this gift." Then Turin, being yet bemused by the eyes of the dragon, as were he treating with a foe that he could no pity, believed the words of Glaurung, and turning away, he sped over the bridge. But as he went, Glaurung spoke behind him, saying in a fell voice, "Haste thee now, son of Hurin, to Dorlomen, or perhaps the orcs shall come before thee once again. And if thou tarry for Findulias, then never shalt thou see Morwen again, and never at all shalt thou see Nienor, thy sister, and they will curse thee." But Turin passed away on the northward road, and Glaurung laughed once more, for he had accomplished the errand of his master. Then he turned to his own pleasure, and set forth his blast, and burned all about him. But all the orcs that were busy in the he routed forth, and drove them away, and denied them their plunder, even to the last thing of worth. The bridge, then, he broke down, and cast it into the foam of Narog. And being thus secured, he gathered all the hoards and riches of Felagund, and heaped them, and lay upon them in the innermost hall, and rested a while. I'm going to stop there for just a hot second because, oh my goodness. Remember when I tell you it gets worse? This is the Greek tragedy of Tolkien's book. Gosh, we still have 7 more pages to go in this chapter. I love it. And Turin hastened along the ways to the north, through the lands now desolate between Narog and Teglin, and the fell winter came down upon him. For in that year snow fell ere autumn was past, and spring came late and cold. Ever it seemed to him, as he went, that he heard the cries of Finduilas, calling his name by wood and hill, and great was his anguish, but his heart being hot with the lies of Glaurung, and seeing ever in his mind the orcs burning the house of Hurin or putting Morwen or Nienor to death, to torment, he held on his way and turned never aside. At last, worn by haste and the long road, for 40 leagues and more had he journeyed without rest, he came with the first ice of winter to the pools of Irvin, there when before he had been healed. But they were now but a frozen mire, and he could drink there no more. Thus he came hardly to the pass of Dorloman, through bitter snows of the north, and found again the land of his childhood. Bare and bleak it was, and Morwen was gone. Her house stood empty, broken and cold, and no living thing dwelt nigh. Therefore Turin departed, and came to the house of Broda the Easterling, and he had to wife Erin. He that had to wife Erin, Hurin's kinswoman. And there he learned of an old servant that I can't read today for some reason. And there he learned of an old servant that Morwen was long gone, for she had fled with Nienor out of Dorloman. None but Erin knew where. Then Turin stood to Broda's table, and seizing him, drew his sword, and demanded that he be told whither Morwen had gone. And Erin declared to him that she went to Doriath to seek her son. For the lands were free from that evil, she said, by the black sword of the south, who has now fallen, they say. Then Turin's eyes were opened, and the last thread of Glaurung's spell were loosed, for anguish and wrath at the lies that had deluded him, and hatred of the oppressor of Morwen, a black rage seized him, and he slew Broda in his hall, and other Easterlings that were his guests. Thereafter he fled into the winter, a hunted man, but he was aided by some that had remained of Hador's people, and knew the ways of the wild, and with them he escaped through the falling snow, and came to the outlaw's refuge in the southern mountains of Dorloman. Thence Turin passed again from the land of his childhood, and returned to Sirion's Vale. His heart was bitter, for to Dorloman he had brought only great woe upon the remnant of his people, and they were glad of his going, and this comfort alone he had, that by the prowess of the black sword the ways of Doriath had been lain open to Morwen. And he said in his thought, Then those deeds wrought not evil to all, and where else might I have better bestowed my kin, even had I come sooner? For if the girdle of Melian be broken, then last hope be ended. Remember, the girdle of Melian is the force field around basically that big forest in the center of Middle-earth right now. Now Turin, coming down from Eredwethrin, sought for Findulias in vain, roaming the woods beneath the mountains, wild and wary as a beast. And he waylaid all the roads that went north to the pass of Sirion. But he was too late, for all the trails had grown cold, were washed away by the winter. Yet thus it was passing that southward down the Teglin that Turin came upon some of the men of Brethiel that were surrounded by orcs, and he delivered them, for the orcs fled from Gorthang. He named himself Wild Man of the Woods, and they besought him to come and dwell with them. But he said that he had an errand yet unachieved to seek Findulias, Orodreth's daughter, of Nargothrond. Then Dorlas, leader of the woodsmen, told the grievous tidings of her death. For the men of Brethiel had waylaid at the crossing of Teglin the orc hosts that led the captives of Nargothrond, hoping to rescue them. But the orcs had at once cruelly slain their prisoners, and Findulias they pinned to a tree with a spear. So she died at last, saying, Tell the Mormegil that Findulias is here. Therefore they had laid her in a mound near the place, and named it Huad en Eleth, the mound of the elf maid. Turin bade them lead him thither, and there he fell down into darkness of a grief that was near death. Then Dorlas, by his black sword, a fame whereof he had come even to the deeps of Brethiel, and by his quest of the king's daughter knew that this wild man was indeed Mormegil of Nargothrond, whom rumor had said was the son of Hurin of Dorloman. Therefore the woodsmen lifted him up and bore him away to their homes. Now those were set in the stockades upon a high place in the forest. Ethil Brandir upon Amon Abel. You don't have to remember that. For the people of Haleth were now dwindled by war, and Brandir, son of Hondir, who ruled them, was a man of gentle mood, and lame also from childhood. And he trusted rather in secrecy than in deeds of war to save them from the power of the north. Therefore he feared the tidings that Dorlas brought, and when he beheld the face of Turin as he lay on a bier a cloud of foreboding lay on his heart. Nevertheless, being moved by his woe, he took him into his own house and tended him, for he had skill in healing, which is basically a good way of saying that Tolkien is a doctor. Tolkien didn't know how to say doctor, just like skilled in healing. A lot of these people also know like how to fix wounds during wartime. Also, someone just asked on TikTok, we are on the Silmarillion, chapter 21 of Turin Turambar. And with the beginnings of spring, Turin cast off his darkness, and grew hale again. And he arose, and he thought that he would remain in Brethiel hidden, and put his shadow behind him, forsaking the past. He took therefore a new name, Turambar, which in the High Elven speech signifies Master of Doom. And he besought the woodsmen to forget that he was a stranger among them, or ever bore that any other name. None the less, he would not wholly leave deeds of war, for he could not endure that the orcs should come to the crossing of Teglin, or draw nigh to Howard and Eleth, and he made that a place of dread for them, so that they shunned it. But he laid his black sword by, and wielded rather the bow and the spear. Now new tidings came to Doriath concerning Nargothrond, for some that had escaped from the defeat and the sack had survived the fell winter of the wild, came at last to Thingol seeking refuge, and the march wardens brought them to the king. And some said that all the enemy had withdrawn northward, and others that Glaurung abode still in the halls of Felagund. And some said that Mormegil was slain, and others that he was cast under a spell by a dragon, and dwelt there yet, as one changed to stone. But all declared that it was known to many in Nargothrond ere the end of the Mormegil was none other than Turin, son of Hurin of Dorloman. Then Morwen was distraught, and refusing the counsel of Melian, rode forth alone into the wild to seek her son, or some true tiding of him. Thingol, therefore, sent Mablung after her, and with many hardy marchwards to find her and guard her, and to learn what news they might, but Nienor was bidden to remain behind. That's Morwen's daughter and Turin's sister. Yet the fearlessness of her house was hers, and in an evil hour, in hope that Morwen would return, when she saw that her daughter would go with her into peril, Nienor disguised herself as one of Thingol's people, and went with that ill-fated riding. They came upon Morwen by the banks of Sirion, and Mablung besought her to return to Menegroth. But she was fey, and would not be persuaded. Then also the coming of Nienor was revealed, and despite Morwen's command she would not go back, and Mablung perforce brought them to the hidden ferries of the Meres of Twilight, and they passed over Sirion, and after 3 days' journeying they came to the Amon Ereth, the Hill of Spies, that long ago Felagund had caused to be raised with great labor, a league before the doors of Nargothrond. There Mablung set a guard of riders about Morwen and her daughter, and forbade them go further. But he, seeing from the hill no sign of the enemy, went down with his scouts to Nogrod, as stealthily as they could go. But Glaurung was aware of all that they did, and he came forth in heat of wrath, and lay into the river. A vast vapor and foul reek went up, in which Mablung and his company were blinded and lost. Then Glaurung passed east over Narog. Seeing the onset of the dragon, the guards among Amon Ereth sought to lead Morwen and Nienor away, and fly with them at all speed back eastward. But the wind bore the blank mists upon them, and their horses were maddened by the dragon stench, and they were ungovernable, meaning they couldn't get the horses under control. And they ran this way and that, so that some were dashed against trees and were slain, and others were borne far away. Thus the ladies were lost, and of Morwen indeed no sure tiding came ever to Doriath after. But Nienor, being thrown by her steed, yet unhurt, made her way back to Amon Ethir, there to await Mablung, and came thus above the reek into the sunlight. And looking westward, she stared straight into the eyes of Glaurung, whose head lay upon the hilltop. Her will strove with him for a while, but he put forth his power, and having learned who she was, he constrained her to gaze into his eyes, and he laid a spell of utter darkness and forgetfulness upon her, so that she could not remember so that she could remember nothing that had befallen her, nor her own name, nor the name of any other thing. And for many days she could neither hear, nor see, nor be stirred by her will. Then Glaurung left her standing alone upon Amon Ethir, and went back to Nargothrond. Now Mablung, who greatly daring had explored the halls of Felagund when Glaurung left them, fled from them at the approach of the dragon, and returned to Amon Ethir. The sun sank and night fell as he climbed the hill, and he found none there save Nienor, standing alone under the stars as an image of stone. No word she spoke or heard, but would follow, if he took her hand. Therefore in great grief he led her away, though it seemed to him in vain, for they were both like to perish, succorless in the wild. But they were found by 3 of Mablung's companions, and slowly they journeyed northward and eastward towards the fences of the land of Doriath beyond Sirion, and the guarded bridge nigh to the inflow of Esgalduin. I just want to briefly pause here and say, there are a lot of different places in this chapter specifically. You do not have to remember all of them. Even I glaze over them most times. I know where they are, but please by no means feel like you have to remember this. This is a confusing chapter as far as location goes. But Nienor, hang on. I lost it. But even as they drew near the fences, at last she closed her staring eyes and would sleep, and they laid her down and rested, also, unheedful, for they were utterly outworn. There they were assailed by an orc band, such as now roamed among often as nigh the fences of Doriath as they dared. But Nienor in that hour, recovering her hearing and sight, and being awakened by the cries of the orcs, she sprang up in terror, and fled ere they could come to her. Then the orcs gave chase, and the elves after, and they overtook the orcs and slew them ere they could harm her. But Nienor escaped, for she fled in a madness of fear. Hang on. I lost my place again. For she fled as in a madness of fear, swifter than a deer, and tore off all her clothing as she ran until she was naked, and she passed out of their sight, running northward. And though they sought her long, they found her not, nor any trace of her. At last Mablung in despair returned to Menegroth and told the tidings. Then Thingol and Melian were filled with grief. But Mablung went forth, and sought long in vain for the tidings of Morwen and Nienor. But Nienor ran into the woods until she was spent, and then fell, and slept, and awoke. And it was a sunlit morning, and she rejoiced in light as it were a new thing, and all things else that she saw seemed new and strange, for she had no names for them. Nothing did she remember save a darkness that lay behind her, and a shadow of fear. Therefore she went warily as a hunted beast, and became famished, for she soon had no food, and knew not how to seek it. But coming at last to the crossing of Teglin, she passed over, seeking the shelter of the great tree of Brethiel, for she was afraid. and it seemed to her that the darkness was overtaking her again, from which she had fled. But it was a great storm of thunder that came upon the south, and in terror she cast herself down upon a mound of Howd and Eleth, stopping her ears from the thunder. But the rain smote her and drenched her, and she lay like a wild beast that is dying. There Turimbar found her, as he came to the crossing of Teglin, having heard rumor of orcs that roamed near. And seeing in the flare of lightning the body, as it seemed, of a slain maiden lying in the mound of Findulias, he was stricken to the heart. But the woodsman lifted her up, and Turimbar cast his cloak about her, and they took her to a lodge nearby and warmed her, and gave her food. And as soon as she looked upon Turimbar, she was comforted. For it seemed to her that she had found at last something that she had sought in her darkness, but she would not be parted from him. And when she asked her concerning her name and her kin and her misadventures, then she became troubled as a child that perceived that something is demanded but cannot understand what it may be. And she wept. Therefore Turimbar said, "Do not be troubled. A tale shall wait. But I will give you a name, and I will call you Ninel, Tear Maiden." And it was that name that she shook her head, but said, Ninel. That was the first word that she spoke after her darkness, and it remained her name among the woodsmen ever after. On the next day they bore her towards Ethel Brandir, but when they came to Dimrost, the rainy stair, there this tumbling stream of Celebrost fell towards Teglin. A great shuddering came about upon her, wherefore afterwards that place is called Nen Girith, the shuddering waters. Oh, that might be my neighbor again. Chill River. Sorry, y'all. Let's continue. Ere she came to the home of the woodsman upon Amon Obed, she was sick with a fever, and long she lay thus, tended by the women of Brethiel, and they taught her language as to an infant. But ere the autumn came by the skill of Brandir, she was healed by her sickness, and could speak, but nothing did she remember of the time before she was found by Turimbar on the mound of Howd and Ethiel. And Brandir loved her, but all her heart was given to Turimbar. In that time the woodsmen were not troubled by the orcs, and Turimbar went not to war, and there was peace in Brethiel. His heart turned to Ninel, and he asked her in marriage. But for that time she delayed, in spite of her love, for Brandir forebode he knew not what, and sought to restrain her, rather that for her sake than his own or the rivalry with Turimbar. And he revealed to her that Turimbar was Turin, son of Hurin, and though she knew not the name, a shadow fell upon her mind. But when 3 years had passed since the sack of Nargothrond, Turimbar asked Ninel again, and vowed that now he would wed her, or else go back to war in the wild. And Ninel took him with joy, and they were wedded at the midsummer, and the woodsmen of Brethiel made a great feast. But ere the end of the year, Glaurung set orcs of his dominion against Brethiel, and Turimbar sat at home, deedless, for he had promised to Ninel that he would not go to battle only if their home was assailed. But the woodsmen were worsted, and Dorlas unbraided him that he should not aid the people that he had taken for his own. Then Turimbar rose and brought forth again his black sword, and he gathered a great company of men of Brethiel, and they defeated the orcs utterly. But Glaurung heard tidings that the black sword was in Brethiel, and he pondered what he heard, devising new evil. In the spring of that year, Ninel conceived, and she became wan and sad. And at the same time there came to Ethel Brandir the first rumor that Glaurung had issued from Nargothrond. Then Turimbar sent out scouts far afield, for now he ordered things that he would, and few gave heed to Brandir, and it drew near to summer. And as it drew near to summer, Glaurung came to the borders of Brethiel, and lay near the west shore of Teglin. Then there was a great fear among the woodsfolk, for it was now plain that the great worm would assail them and ravage their lands, and not pass by returning to Angband, as they had hoped. They sought therefore the counsel of Turambar, and he counselled them that it was vain to go against Glaurung with all their forces, for only by cunning and good fortune could they defeat him. He offered therefore himself to seek the dragon in the borders of the lands, and he bade the rest of the people to remain in Brandir, but to prepare for flight. For if Glaurung had the victory, he would come first to the woodsmen's homes and destroy them, and they could not hope to withstand him. But if they scattered far and wide, they might escape, for Glaurung would not take up his dwelling in Brethiel, and would soon return to Nargothrond. Then Turambar asked for companions willing to aid him in his peril, and Dorlas stood forth, but no others. Therefore Dorlas upbraided the people, and spoke scorn of Brandir, who could not play the part of their heir of the house of Haleth. And Brandir shamed him, and Brandir was shamed before his people, and was bitter at heart. But Hunthor, kinsman of Brandir, asked his leave to go in his stead. Then Turambar said farewell to Nianel, and she was filled with fear and foreboding, and their parting was sorrowful. But Turambar set out with his 2 companions, and went to Nen Girith. I'm going to take a quick break there. You 2 people, feel free to skip ahead. I'm just going to grab a quick bite to eat. I just need a quick snack. 1 second. Hi, y'all. Yeah, sorry, I did not mean for this to go this long. I probably should have broken this up into 3 parts, but we are very close to the end, so I'm going to keep going. We are so close. All right. Here we go. Got it. Then Nianel, being unable to endure her fear and unwilling to wait in the Ethel tidings for Turambar's fortune, set forth after him, and a great company went with her. At this Brandir was filled all at more with dread, and he sought to dissuade her and the people that would go with her from this rashness, but they heeded him not. Therefore he renounced his lordship and all love for the people that had scorned him, and having naught left but his love for Nianel, he girt himself with a sword and went after her. But being lame... Oh, chill. But being lame, he fell far behind. Now Turambar came to Nen Gereth at sundown, and there he learned that Glaurung lay on the brink of the high shores of Teglin, and was like to move when night fell. Then he called those tidings good, for the dragon lay at Kabed en Aras, where the river ran in the deep and narrow gorge, that the hunted deer might overleap. And Turambar thought that he would seek no further, but would attempt to pass over the gorge. Therefore he purposed to creep down at dusk and descend into the ravine under night, and cross over the wild water, and then to climb up the further cliff, so come to the dragon beneath his guard. This counsel he took, but the heart of Dorlas failed when they came to the races of Teglin in the dark, and he dared not attempt the perilous crossing, and drew back and lurked in the woods, burdened with shame. Turambar and Hunthor, nonetheless, crossed over in safety, for the loud roaring of the water drowned all the sound, and Glaurung slept. But ere the middle night the dragon roused, and with and with a great noise and with a great noise and blast cast his forward part across the chasm, and began to draw his bulk after. Turambar and Hunthor were well nigh overcome with the heat and the stench, as they sought in haste for a way to come at Glaurung, and Hunthor was slain by a great stone that was dislodged from on high by the passage of the dragon, and smote him in the head, and cast him into the river. So he ended of the house of Haleth, not the least valiant. Then Turambar summoned all his will and courage, and climbed the cliff alone, and came beneath the dragon. Then he drew Gorthang, and with all his might of his arm and of his hate, he thrust it into the soft belly of the worm, even up to the hilt. But when Glaurung felt his death pang, he screamed, and in his dreadful throe he heaved up his bulk and hurled himself across the chasm. And there, laying... I lost my place, sorry. But when Glaurung felt the death pang, he screamed, and in his death throes he heaved up his bulk and hurled himself across the chasm, and there lay lashing and coiling in his agony. And he set all in a blaze about him, and beat all to ruin, until at last his fires died, and he lay still. Now Gorthang had been wrested from Turambar's hand in the throes of Glaurung, and it clave in the belly of the dragon. Turambar therefore crossed the water once more, desiring to recover his sword and to look upon his foe. And he found him stretched at the length, and rolled upon one side, and the hilt of Gorthang stood in his belly. Then Turambar seized the hilt, and set his foot upon the belly, and cried in mockery of the dragon and his words at Nargothrond, "Hail, worm of Morgoth, well met again. Die now in the darkness have thee. Thus is Turin, son of Hurin, avenged." And he wrenched out the sword, but a spout of black blood followed it, and fell on his hands, and the venom burned it. And thereupon Glaurung opened his eyes and looked upon Turambar with such malice that it smote him as a blow. And by that stroke, and the anguish of the venom, he fell into a dark swoon as one lay dead, and his sword beneath him. The screams of Glaurung rang in the woods, and came to the people that had waited in Nen Gereth. And when those that looked forth heard them, and saw afar the ruin and burning that the dragon made, they deemed that he had triumphed, and was destroying those that assailed him. And Nienel sat and shuddered beside the falling waters. And at the voice of Glaurung, her darkness crept up upon her again, so that she could not stir from that place of her own will. Even so, Brandir found her, for he came to Nen Gereth at last, limping wearily. And when he heard that the dragon had crossed the river and had beaten down his foe, his heart yearned towards Nienel in pity. Yet he thought also, Turambar is dead, but Nienel lives. Now it may be that she will come with me. Not a fan. After a while, therefore, he stood by Nienel and said, "Come, it is time to go. If you will, I will lead you." And he took her hand and rose silently and followed him, and in the darkness none saw them go. But as they went down the path of the crossing, the moon rose, and cast a grey light into the land. And Nienel said, "Is this the way?" And Brandir answered that he knew no way save to flee as they might from Glaurung, and escape into the wilds. But Nienel said, "The black sword was my beloved and my husband. To seek him only do I go. What else could you think?" And she sped before him, and thus she came towards the crossing of Teglin beneath the Huadaneleth in the white moonlight, and dread came to her. Then with a cry she turned away, casting off her cloak, and fled southward along the river, and her white raiment shone in the moon. Thus Brandir saw her from the hillside, and turned to cross her path. But he was still behind her when she came to the ruin of Glaurung, nigh the brink of Kabet en Aras. There she saw the dragon laying, but heeded him not. For a man lay beside him, and she ran to Turin and called his name in vain. Then, finding that his hands were burned, she washed it with tears and bound it with strips of raiment, and she kissed him and cried to him again to awake. Thereat Glaurung stirred for the last time ere he died, and he spoke with his last breath, saying, "Hail, Nienor, daughter of Hurin. We meet again ere the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last. But now thou shalt know him, a stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin. Turin, son of Hurin. But the worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself." Then Glaurung died, and the veil of his malice was taken from her, and she remembered all the days of her life. Looking down upon Turin, she cried, "Farewell, O twice beloved. Ah, Turin, Turambar, Turim Abaratanen, master of doom, by doom mastered. Oh, happy to be dead." Then Brandir, who heard all, standing stricken upon the edge of ruin, hastened towards her, but she ran from him in distraught with horror and anguish, and coming to the brink of Kabed and Aras, cast herself over, and was lost in the wild water. Then Brandir came and looked down and turned away in horror. And though he no longer desired life, he could not seek death in that roaring water. And thereafter no man looked again upon Kabed and Aras, nor could any beast or bird come there, nor could any tree grow, and it was named Kabed Neramarth, the leap of dreadful doom. But Brandir made his way back to Nengerith to bring tidings to the people, and he met Dorlas in the woods and slew him, the first blood that he had ever spilled. And at last he came to Nengerith, and men cried to him, "Have you seen her? For Nienel is gone." And he answered, "Nienel is gone forever. The dragon is dead, and Turambar is dead. And those tidings are good." The people murmured at these words, saying that he was crazed, but Brandir said, "Hear me to the end. Nienel the beloved is also dead." She cast herself into Teglin, desiring life no more, for she learned that she was none other than Nienor, daughter of Hurin of Dorloman, ere her forgetfulness came upon her, and that Turambar was her brother, Turin, son of Hurin. But even as he ceased, and the people wept, Turin himself came before them. For when the dragon died, he swooned. His swoon left him, and he fell into a deep sleep of weariness. But the cold of the night troubled him, and the hilt of Gorthong drove into his side, and he awoke. Then he saw that one had tended his hands, and wondered much that he was left none the less to lie upon the cold ground. And he called. Hearing no answer, he went in search of aid, for he was weary and sick. But when the people saw him, they drew back in fear, thinking that it was his unquiet spirit, and he said, "Nay, be glad, for the dragon is dead, and I live. But wherefore have you scorned my counsel and come into peril? And where is Nienel? For her I shall see, and surely you did not bring her from her house." Then Brandir told him that it was so, and Nienel was dead. But the wife of Dorlas cried out, "Nay, lord, he is crazed. For he came here saying that you were dead, and he called it good tidings, but you live." Then Turambar was wrathful, and believing that all Brandir said or did was done in malice towards himself and Nienel, begrudging their love, and he spoke evilly of Brandir, calling him Clubfoot. Then Brandir reported all that he heard, and named Nienel Nienor, daughter of Hurin. And he cried out upon Turambar at the last words of and he cried out upon Turambar with the last words of Glaurung, that he was cursed unto his kin and to all that harbored him. Then Turambar fell into a fury, and in those words he heard the feet of his doom overtaking him, and he charged Brandir with leading Nienel to her death, and publishing with delight the lies of Glaurung, if indeed he devised them not himself. And he cursed Brandir, and slew him, and he fled from the people in the woods. But after a while his madness left him, and he came to Howard and Eleth, and there sat, and pondered all his deeds. And he cried upon Findulias to bring him counsel, for he knew not whether he would do now more ill to go to Doriath to seek his kin, or to forsake them forever and seek death in battle. And even as he sat there, Mablung, with the company of grey elves, came over the crossing of Teglin, and he knew Turin, and hailed him, and he was glad indeed to find him yet living. For he learned of the coming of forth of Glaurung, that his path led to Brethiel, and also had heard reports that the black sword of Nargothrond now dwelt there. Therefore he came to give warning to Turin, and help if need be. But Turin said, "You come too late. The dragon is dead." Then they marveled, and gave him great praise, but he cared nothing for it, and said, "This only I ask. Give me news of my kin. For in Dorloman I learned that they had gone to the hidden kingdom." Then Mablung was dismayed, but needs must tell to Turin how Morwen was lost, and Nienor cast into a spell of dumb forgetfulness, and how she escaped them upon the border of Doriath and fled northward. Then at last Turin knew that doom had overtaken him, and that he had slain Brandir unjustly. Sorry, I realized I skipped a line. I am so sorry. The line is, "And then he cursed Brandir and slew him, and fled from the people of the woods." I don't remember reading that part, so Brandir is dead. I apologize. Then at last Turin knew that his doom had overtaken him, and that he had slain Brandir unjustly, so that the words of Glaurung were fulfilled in him. And he laughed at once, crying, "This is a bitter jest indeed." But he bade Mablung go, and returned to Doriath with curses upon it. "And a curse too upon your errand," he said. "This only was wanting. Now comes the night." Then he fled from them like the wind, and they were amazed, wondering what madness had seized him. And they followed after him, but Turin outran them. And he came to Kared and Aras, and heard the roaring of the waters, and saw that all the leaves fell sere from the trees, as though winter had come. There he drew forth his sword, that now alone remained to him of his possessions, and said, "Hail, Gorthang! No lord or loyalty dost thou know, save the hand that wieldeth thee. From no blood wilt thou shirk. Wilt thou therefore take Turambar? Wilt thou slay me swiftly?" And from the blade rang a cold voice in answer. "Yea, I will drink thy blood gladly, that so I may forget the blood of Beleg my master, and the blood of Brandir, slain unjustly. I will slay thee swiftly." And from the blade, then Turin set the hilt upon the ground, and cast himself upon the point of Gorthang, and the black blade took his life. But Mablung and the elves came and looked on the shape of Glaurung lying dead, and upon the body of Turin, and they grieved. And when men of Brethiel came thither, and they learned the reason of Turin's madness and death, they were aghast. And Mablung said bitterly, "I also have been meshed in the doom of the children of Horin, and thus with my tidings have slain one that I loved." Then he lifted up Turin, and found that Gorthang had broken asunder. But elves and men gathered there great store of wood, and they made a mighty burning, and the dragon was consumed to ashes. Turin they lay in a high mound, where he was fallen, and the shards of Gorthang were laid beside him. And when all was done, the elves sang a lament for the children of Hurin, and a great grey stone they sat upon the mound, and thereon was carven in runes in Doriath, Turin, Turimbar, Dagnir, Glaurunga, and beneath them wrote also Nienor, Nienel. But she was not there, nor was it ever known whither the cold waters of Teglin had taken her. I'm going to stop there. There is a bit more to this story, but it continues on for a few more pages, and we have been live for more than 2 hours. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to wrap up here. I just noticed that Wizard Way Chris is here. Why do you always tune in right at the most traumatic moments of the Silmarillion? I don't know, Chris, but you do have this habit of doing this. YouTube folks, thank you so much for joining. I know this was a long episode, but it is one of the heavier chapters. We will pick up there next Sunday, I think, at noon Eastern time. I have to double check because I'm going to be totally honest, I don't remember my schedule off the top of my head, so hang on. Yes, we will have a stream next Sunday at noon if you're interested in joining. Thanks, YouTube. Bye.